Welcome everyone. I think it's 3:01 p.m. So we will start because we are gonna have a good discussion, hopefully, about sparkling wine. So let's start. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us again for this new webinar. So thanks for being with us. We hope you will enjoy this webinar and will develop knowledge and learn skills to be used in your vineyard and winery. So I'm Dr. Aude Waterloo, an assistant professor of enology in the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition at Iowa State University. And I'm co-hosting this webinar with my friend and colleague, Drew Horton, a research specialist of enology at the University of Minnesota Grapes Breeding and Enology Project. So before starting the webinar, just a few instructions. So the webinar is being recorded right now, and that will be available. The recording will be available on YouTube in few days, I think. The previous recordings are already available, and I will put the link into the chat box just to make sure you have access to that. If you have any question, please use the Q&A box or the chat box that you can find at the bottom of your screen. By clicking on the three dots, you should be able to see to write anything you have. And the question will be answered during the discussion we will have with the panel. At the end also of the webinar, you will receive an email to complete the Qualtrics survey about how we did and what we will need to change for future webinars. So please just take a few minutes to complete that survey. That's really important for us. So today we will have only one presentation, but a great presentation, followed by a winemaker panel discussion about sparkling winemaking techniques, the pros, the cons, and any specific tips that you may need for the future. So presenting today will be Michael Jones from Scott Laboratories. And then during the panel discussion, we will be joined by Andy Morse from Breezy Hills Vineyards in Iowa, Kristy Walker and Ken Foulker from Walker Homestead Farm and Vineyard in Iowa, Josie Boyle from Mousse Sparkling Wine Company in Minnesota. So let's start with our first presenter today, Michael Jones. And I will leave Drew to introduce him.
I will introduce Michael Jones. I've known Michael for many years, and he's always very informative and very entertaining. And I'll just remind everybody that Michael Jones, he's got about 35 years of experience, 19 of those years at Domaine Chandon making sparkling wine. Michael came on board with Scott Laboratories in 2007 with more than 35 years of winemaking experience under his belt. Since then, he has shared his wealth of knowledge with North America by traveling extensively to trade shows and seminars throughout the country, many times as a speaker. Michael's a UC Davis graduate. He has lived and worked in Burgundy, France, and in the Hunter Valley in Australia. Domestically, Michael built his experience at Nova Vine, Hansel Vineyards, and at Camus as well. As I mentioned, he spent 19 years at Domaine Chandon, where he wore a multitude of hats and was involved with vineyards, operations, winemaking, laboratory. Was part of the team that established the wine education program. Prior to his start in the wine industry, Michael spent a year traveling cross-country by freight train, stopping to work on a shrimp boat in the Gulf of Mexico, pitching hay in San Antonio, Texas, and selling art in New Orleans. Michael, we're ready to hear your presentation.
I forgot that I told you all that stuff. Okay, let's see.
So you should be able to share.
I just press share, and now oh, there. Okay, very good. Oh my God. So
nothing is showing up.
Nothing is showing up?
No.
Huh. And yet I did press share, and I have the this screen here. Let's see, let me try again. Share.
It's coming.
Now, is something showing up now?
Yes, so put the PowerPoint, yep.
And now?
Yes, can you make in presenter mode?
Yes,
That little
I need
that
to
little
get,
that little
uh,
screen on the lower right.
oh, there. No, it's for me, there.
There you
Okay.
go.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah, on my computer's a little backwards. It was on the upper left instead of the lower right. So, uh, bubbles. Actually, bubbles is my first love of in wine. Uh, to the extent that in 1991, that was actually one of the best years of my life, in that I did not have a single day from January 1st to December 31st that did not, where I did not consume at least one glass of sparkling wine. Anyway, in the US, the most important thing is to understand what sparkling wine is. To call wine sparkling wine in the US, it must contain 3.92 grams per liter of CO2 minimum, and that's created by fermentation in a closed container. If it is artificially infused with CO2, it is considered to be carbonated wine. Uh, Methods of production. Traditional method, this is what goes into the making of all champagne. Pet nat, and I'm going to get more into descriptions of these as we progress. Uh, Pet nat is the oldest method for it's the method ancestral, and it preceded the traditional method for making a sparkling wine. Charmat method is a sort of the second newest method for making sparkling wine. It was developed in Italy and then at the end of the 19th century, and then perfected in France at the beginning of the 20th century. Uh, there were two other kinds of means of making sparkling wine that we're not going to cover: transfer and transversage. Uh, uh, Basically, they require a lot of fancy equipment. There's only two transfer operations in the US, one at Bronco in California and the other at Pleasant Valley up in New York. And it requires a tremendous amount of very expensive equipment that can take, all of which can take high pressure. And then, so of the things that we're covering, I'm going to end up with carbonation because there is a lot of that going on. And carbonation is actually can be a lot of fun. When I was traveling along around the Mediterranean, especially in Italy, in the middle of summer, you were always, for your white wine in a restaurant, given the option of having a slightly frisante or slightly carbonated wine. And it always made like, if you got a slightly carbonated Vermentino on a 90-degree day, it was just a wonderful, wonderful, refreshing beverage. So here you have a chart that put together. You don't have to memorize this, but this shows you the interrelationship of the different methods and how they come about. Since I'm going to go into each of these methods, I'm not going to linger here so that, but especially, if you go on to I guess, pull up this presentation later on, or also Ode and Drew have this. It gives you an idea of how each of these means of making a sparkling or carbonated wine relates to the other. Yeah, we're going to start with the traditional method. And the traditional method basically goes back to probably the late 17th century. Here, you start with the grapes, of course, and you're making a base wine, a non-sparkling base wine. The important thing here, and you're going to see this with, I think, every method, the quality of grapes is so important. One of the reasons that some of the other methods are looked upon as cheaper is because people see those other methods as being a way of producing something really fast and really cheap, and so they use really, really cheap grapes. Grapes are all important, whether you're making sparkling wine or still wine. And so you're starting out with very high quality grapes. You one of the things you're doing with sparkling wine is you're picking the grapes younger, quite often as early as a month or even longer before you're picking the same grapes for a non-sparkling wine. You're making your base wine. You want it to be a quick, clean fermentation. It's traditionally, like for instance, when I worked at Domaine Chandon, we'd fermented about mid to high 60s, and we wanted the yeast to be happy. We wanted a clean fermentation that would go to completion, and we then would rack off and stabilize the wine as soon as possible. Any fault in there, even something very subtle that in a still wine might be considered a little bit of complexity, might be conceivably could be so magnified by bubbles as to make a finished sparkling wine undrinkable. One of the things I did sort of leave out in simplifying this is in traditional champagne making, you have a number of different base wines made. And the blending together is a vital aspect of traditional champagne making in the Champagne region. When you have your finished blend of your base wine, you now add to that yeast and sugar. When you're adding sugar, basically, you look about 4 grams per liter of sugar will equate to 1 atmosphere of pressure. So under standard conditions, traditionally 24 grams per liter is added so that you get 6 atmospheres under standard conditions after the second fermentation. The wine, sugar, and yeast goes into bottle. A temporary cap goes over, usually a crown cap, and usually a crown cap specifically made for sparkling wine. The second fermentation takes place. Usually it will be anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, after which the yeast dies and settles down to the side of the bottle. It is the wine aging on that gives a lot of the complexity to sparkling wine. It releases proteins, peptides, amino acids into the wine. A lot of these, like especially the proteins, really help, along with the proteins naturally occurring in the grapes, they help with the quality of the bubbles, the longevity of the bubbles, and the quality of the foam on top of the wine when you pour it. In France, minimum of 15 months is needed aging. I believe it's 2 years now. No, I think it's 3 years if it's vintage dated, and a lot of the top houses will, especially for their top cuvées, will age for even longer. You have something like a Bollinger RD, which is a late disgorged, will be aged upwards of 9 or 10 years on the yeast following the second fermentation. And talking to some of the technical people over in Champagne, say after about 10 years, no more actual gain is made from the autolysis or the breaking down of the grapes. After the second fermentation, after the aging, you now have to get rid of the sediment. So the first step in that is riddling. I'm sure you've all seen riddling racks, these A-frame racks with holes drilled in them. They hold the bottles first at a horizontal position, and then you're turning the bottles each day, slowly moving them into the upside down position, to ultimately the yeast spirals through the bottle, picking up any stray particles, pulling them down to the neck. At that point, the bottles are pretty much in the vertical position. The bottles are then they're chilled down, and then when they're pulled out of the chiller, and you chill them down before disgorging or before opening them up to remove the sediment, you chill them down because in colder temperatures, you won't lose as much pressure inside the bottles. When the bottles are upside down, the bottles that go into a rack that holds about 1.5 inches of the neck in a freezing brine, and it causes a frozen plug to encapsulate the yeast. The bottles then put upright and disgorging. You pry off the temporary cap, the pressure inside blows out the frozen plug of sediment. During the brief time that the wine is open, a dosage goes in. This is the sugar syrup mixed with a little bit of sulfur. Other things can be added to change the flavor. Traditionally, quite often they would use a little bit of brandy. This is the last chance to actually impact the flavor of the wine, and then the cork goes in. That is the traditional method. This is a picture, actually two pictures. The picture on the left shows you the traditional riddling racks. In many houses that I visited over in the Champagne region, they've switched to the picture on the right, which is a Giro palette. It is a riddling machine. It is a bin who holds approximately 500 bottles. And they work by a computer program where the bottles start out in the horizontal position and the whole bin is moved a little bit each day, slowly working its way into the upside down position. And then this is a picture of how much yeast is in the average bottle after the riddling is over. And that is the yeast that is encapsulated when you freeze the wine in the neck of the bottle. And this is a picture of the frozen plug of yeast before the disgorging. Okay, now on to pet nat. Pet nat preceded the traditional method. And a lot of people think that, for the same reason the champagne was sort of a happy accident, that so was the method ancestrale. Once again, the quality of grapes is vital. You start your fermentation. But what would happen in quite often in France is that the fermentation would be arrested before it was complete because the cold air of winter would set in and the cellars would be too cold to continue a fermentation. So the fermentation would stop, but there was still sugar left in the wine. And the wine would be put into bottles, stopper put in, and then in spring when the weather would warm up, the fermentation would kick on again and ferment the last of the sugar that was left in the bottle, creating bubbles in the wine. Of course, controlling the amount of pressure was difficult because you had no idea how much sugar was left in the wine. More sugar, more pressure. So in the modern pet nat method, in essence, you are fermenting. Ideally, you do real-time tracking of your fermentable sugars, because relying on a hydrometer is always a little dicey. Sometimes wines can be dry at just under like -1 Brix. Sometimes they're not dry till it's -2 Brix. I have had winemakers forget that zero Brix on a hydrometer is not zero sugar. 0 Brix, this probably can still be as much as like 2% sugar or more. And anyway, you put the bottle when you stop the fermentation. Ideally, you chill the wine down, stop the fermentation with the desired amount of sugar left. As I told you before, 4 grams per liter of sugar will translate into about 1 atmosphere pressure. The wine, the sugar, and some of the yeast that is still active in the wine go into the bottles. A temporary cap goes over, and then the bottles are brought up. Well, one of the ways you stop the wine or slow it down so you can bottle it is you chill it down. You then, after you bottle it, put the temporary cap on, you bring the bottles up to a warmer temperature. You finish the fermentation inside the bottle. At that point, you have pressure. Ideally, you don't have too much pressure. And clarification, most pet nats are not clarified. Or if they're clarified minimally, and there's still some sediment left in there. For the most part, I'd say most of the pet nats have no clarification. And so you don't have the need of another closure. Now, several caveats here in that because of difficulty in stopping the fermentation exactly at the right amount of sugar for the amount of pressure you need. There was one winemaker in the Loire Valley where basically modern pet nat received this sort of resurgence of popularity. He referred to pet nats as Russian roulette in a bottle. And the other problem is that if you ferment too far before it goes into bottle, then you're going to end up with no pressure. Ideally, I would not ever try to get as much pressure as I do in a traditional champagne. I would probably go for about 3 to 4 atmospheres of pressure. And I have some friends that are doing their pet nats at 2 atmospheres. So that's pet nat. Charmat method. Once again, grapes. Quality of grapes is going to be a big determinant on the quality of the wine you make using the Charmat method. I was very happy to hear that Josie was doing a Charmat method because I've become very taken with it of late. A friend of mine who is German said that in Germany they have Charmat producers all over the countryside, and when people have an abundance of grapes, you make the wine you need for your still wine production, and you take the excess over to the Charmat producer that makes it into sparkling for you. This method was developed in the early 20th century. Basically, you make your base wine, you add sugar and yeast. So the base wine, the sugar, the yeast go into a pressure-rated fermentation tank. It's sealed up. A second fermentation takes place in there. After the second fermentation, filtration is done under pressure into a bottling tank. And the bottling tank, we'll probably just get into this later on during the panel discussion. The bottling tank has to be pressurized ahead of time before the wine goes into it. Otherwise, the wine going into it would just lose all of its pressure. Anyway, it's filtered under pressure into the bottling tank, and then most of the time it is then sterile filtered into a counter pressure filler and the closure put on. Now there are variations on this. One of the variations is like is created almost like a pet nat, where you get toward the end of the second fermentation, and when you are at the desired sugar level for the pressure you want, you just seal up the tank at that point and let it complete its second fermentation in that tank. So it's not 2 fermentations, it's just a continuation of the first one. And another variation is done by a friend of mine down in Temecula, who makes a very good high-end Charmat method sparkling wine. And he doesn't use a pump in any of the transferring of his sparkling wines using the Charmat method. He uses pressure differential. So he will get up to 6 atmospheres in the fermentation tank, and in his bottling tank that he's filtering to, he will have that set for 5 atmospheres, so that extra atmosphere pressure will be enough to push the wine from one tank to the other. And then he uses pressure differential again to push the wine to the counter pressure filler. That's the Charmat method. And if you want examples of high-end Charmat wines, well, look at Josie, who will be on our panel. Look at in Temecula at South Coast Winery, and Larry Mobby up in Michigan. All are making high-end Charmat wines. You also have the good high-end Musco out of Italy, and not the old Jacobazzi and Riuniti, not that stuff. But and then you also have Prosecco is the Charmat method. Carbonation. The easiest and simplest way to get bubbles in your wine. Any wine can be carbonated. In this case, you can take your finest your finest wine. Like I said, what you'll find is you'll find some very fine Vermentinos along the Ligurian coast in Italy. And in the middle of summer, they will offer you a Vermentino that's very slightly effervescent and it's very refreshing. Um, and this will probably, I would say, ultimately is the easiest because you don't have to worry about fermentation. You don't have to worry about, you can actually clean up your wine completely at the very beginning. So you make your base wine, the wine that you're going to carbonate, you stabilize it, you clean it up, all of that. Now, for the carbonation, you have to do it generally it's done in a bright tank, and slow and cold is the best. There are ways that agitate it more, but the higher the agitation, the bigger the bubbles and the shorter lived the carbonation will be. There was a paper actually done by a fellow in California, Justin Miller. It goes back to the late 50s, early 60s. He developed a means of doing carbonation very low, very slow, and he did it by basically putting the wine opened in the bottle into a chamber that was then slowly pressurized. Very gently, the CO2 was infused in the wine, and then under pressure, the wine was capped. And he claimed to have acquired very small, long-lasting bubbles as a result because there was less agitation than you get in most carbonation processes. Uh, Cold is very important. I did have one winemaker call me from Livermore Valley here in California a couple of years ago. He said his carbonation just was not sticking. No matter how much CO2 he'd pump into the tank, the wine was always relatively flat. Then I found out he was trying to carbonate in the middle of summer at room temperature. Think of a bottle of Coca-Cola. If you open up a very cold bottle of Coca-Cola, you'll get a little when you open it, and most of the pressure stays in the bottle. Open up a warm bottle of Coca-Cola or room temperature bottle of Coca-Cola, and it sprays all over the place and is flat in no time at all. Anyway, after the wine is carbonated, it's bottled through a counter pressure filler, and then a closure is put on. Now, I'm going to go over briefly the pros and cons of the 4 different methods. Pros on the traditional method. Pros is you do have the highest perceived quality, and in many cases you do have the most complexity because it does spend the time aging on the yeast, and that yeast puts a lot of complexity, a lot of mouthfeel in the wine. Now this can also be done in the Charmat method too, and in the Charmat method, once again, with the high-end stuff produced at the friend of mine's place down in Temecula, he holds it 18 months on the yeast in the tank every couple of months, giving it a quick spin of a Guth mixer, excuse me, to mix up the sediment with the wine. You have quite often the smallest, most persistent bubbles with the traditional method. That's because you have the most, in many cases you have the most amount of protein, and protein is vital in maintaining your bubble quality. If you look at traditional champagne, when I was over in the Champagne region, no champagne maker even admitted to doing any bentonite fining because bentonite removes protein. When I checked with some of the technical people there, they said that maybe there's 2% of the producers have some protein instability. but that's a very small amount, and people prefer to take that chance rather than take the chance that they're going to end up with big, short-lived bubbles. So, so maintaining the protein through the not removing the grape protein, and then also getting protein produced by the breakdown of the yeast after the second fermentation. Also, in the traditional method, you can produce at a small level. You can produce sparkling wine with very little specialized equipment, except maybe the crown capper. You can do the rest by hand, and Andy can speak to that during our panel meeting. The cons, it is the most labor intensive and the longest method. It is, once you decide to go beyond a very small level, if you want to expand, some of the specialized equipment, such as disgorging equipment, can be expensive. And then dangerous, yes. You're handling bottles under high pressure, under at least 6 atmospheres of pressure. And all you need is a scratch in the bottle or just a weakness somewhere, and that bottle can explode. So you have to be very careful. Wear something around your neck if you're when you're handling the bottles, and ideally wear a shield over your face. Pros and cons of pet nat. The pros. See, I find pet nat to be exciting just because you never know what you're going to get. It captures the young, fresh, fruity fermentation aromas. I think of all of the times that I've tasted a young wine that is at the tail end of fermentation and is bright and it's crisp and these fermentation esters and aromas and the bubbles that are on the palate. And you're like, God, if only I could put that in a bottle. And that's what Pet Nat does. It's quick to market. It's inexpensive to produce. No specialized equipment is needed except a crown capper. And I'm putting here as a pro, it tends to be inconsistent. That is the selling point that so many of the producers use. It's like, you can always buy a Cabernet and know what you're going to expect. You can buy a Chardonnay and know what to expect. With Pet Nat, it's always exciting. It always changes. It's the element of surprise. The cons. It is generally cloudy. It is inconsistent. So the very thing that can be an element of surprise, if spun in the right mode, if the consumer is not properly educated to it, that the inconsistency can be a negative. In that inconsistency, it might be flat, or it might have too much carbonation. And I saw this with one winemaker who he had too much carbonation. The bottles did not explode. And so long as the wine was in the cellar where it was kept nice and cold, everything was fine. But when they moved it into the tasting room and it went up to room temperature, all of the bottles started spewing around the crown caps. And there might be problems with reduction because of excessive lees. Ideally, in making Pet Nat, you can chill the wines down, cold crash them when you have just the right amount of sugar. Most of your heavy sediment is going to settle down. You can rack off that, and you end up with just enough yeast when you bottle that it finishes the fermentation. If you have, but I saw producers when I was traveling around the country that did not have the means of tracking it that way, did not have the means of chilling the tank down sufficiently, and they ended up with 2 to 3 inches of sediment in the neck of the bottle. And there you can have a problem with sort of reduced sulfur characteristics in the coming from the nose. And then also because of the sediment, you can also, and sediment and a lot of pressure can cause it to gush. Charmat, here you have pros. It is faster than the traditional method. With a mixer, it can be lees aged. You're going to end up with more fruit-driven flavors. So especially with hybrid grapes, which one of the for me, so much of the charm and so many of the hybrid grapes are these incredible fruit characteristics. And the Charmat method is a wonderful way to to maintain those flavors and aromas. Uh, Once the equipment is acquired and it very low labor costs. Now the cons, the initial investment in pressure rated tanks, pumps, filters, everything pressure rated. The initial expense is quite a bit. One of the things you're fighting against in the general market is because of things like, I don't know, famous French champagnes like André and Jacques Bonnet. Uh, there's this image of Charmat as producing only poor quality. But as I mentioned, if you go over to Europe, you'll see some very high quality sparkling wines made using this method, including Prosecco and some of the high end, like the Lambrusco Grasparoso out of the area around Modena and Emilia Romagna. Generally, the bubbles will be depending on how it's treated. If you don't overfine the base wine, you're going to end up uh, uh, with you can have some pretty good bubbles, but generally the bubbles are a little bit bigger, a little bit shorter lasting than traditional method. Then finally, carbonation. Pros, it's fast and easy. Cons, bigger, shorter lived bubbles. You get no added complexity from a yeast after the second fermentation. And then the expense of bright tanks and counter pressure fillers, etc. So I will close this off. This is a picture I took on a wall in the middle of the Champagne region in the town of Auvilliers. It's called the prayer, the morning prayer, la prière du matin. It's Donnez-moi la santé pour longtemps, du boulot pas trop souvent, de l'amour de temps en temps, mais du champagne tout le temps. Means give me health for a long time. Work not too often. Love from time to time, but champagne always. And on that note, thank you, Drew. Thank you, Ode. And thank you, everybody else.
Thanks, Michael. That's a good ending note. I love it. Thanks for your
Yeah.
great presentation. That was really good to have a real overview of every technique.
But I went 31 minutes. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Good. So thanks for all that great presentation. So now it's the time for you to put any question you have in either the Q&A box or the chat box. I already see that we have 2 questions. And so we are with different winemakers who hopefully will help for that discussion.
Yes, indeed. We're ready for the panel discussion. As Ode mentioned earlier, we'll be joined by, and raise your hand when I mention your name, Andy Morse from Breezy Hills Vineyard in Iowa. Kristy Walker from Walker Homestead Farm and Vineyard in Iowa, along with
Kent.
Kurt. Did I get you?
Kent.
Kent. Sorry.
Okay.
Kent. And Josie Boyle from Mousse Sparkling Wine Company in Jordan, Minnesota. We are fortunate indeed today to have so many experienced winemakers here to discuss the subject of sparkling winemaking. And I'll just add that in most of these cases, these are smaller, newer producers who have really built their own cellars and have acquired their own equipment and their own knowledge and experience, especially in the use of our Midwestern interspecific hybrid grapes. And so any of you folks out there listening, you've got an incredible opportunity here to get some really practical nuts and bolts knowledge on how to start your own sparkling wine program. Ode, you said we've got a couple questions?
Yeah, and it's coming. I'm very happy to see all those questions. So the first question is from Maudik. In Charmat method, you mentioned, Michael, that it's necessary to push the wine from second fermentation tank into a bottling tank. So why is that? And could the wine be bottled straight from the fermentation tank using a counter pressure filter?
It would be difficult because the way you add your dosage is you put it in to the bottling tank. Well, before you seal up that tank, so you can add your dosage to the bottling tank, and then when you filter into the bottling tank, the dosage mixes with the wine. Now, I'm sure that there are ways, and I think I've heard of some systems in Germany where they have inline dosage additions. I have not seen any of that in the United States, and that would require some very fine tuning and probably some very expensive equipment. But if you try now, if you're not doing if you're not adding any dosage in the Charmat method, then conceivably you could do it. Josie, you can talk to this too. If you're making it bone dry, then I see no reason why you couldn't go through from your second fermentation directly through your primary filter, which acts as a pre-filter, through a sterile filter into your counter pressure filler. Josie?
Yeah, the only thing I would think of is just making sure your sulfur levels at bottling are correct. So again, it's if you're, I don't know. I've always just filtered right into a bottling tank because even if you don't want to sweeten the wine, you still want to have some level of sulfur in the bottle after bottling. So I don't know how I don't know how you do it otherwise.
Yeah, it would once again, it have to be metered in, which would be an expensive proposition.
Right.
Okay.
Yep, but it is one of the reasons why I can't tell you how many winemakers I've had approach me saying, I have a pressure rated tank. I'm going to do the Charmat method, but they only have one tank.
Mm-hmm.
You need two tanks because you always need a tank to go into. If you have 10 tanks, you still need, if you, let's say you have 10 tanks that are full, you still need one tank empty. You always need one tank empty so you can go into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
There is another question related to pet nat. So should wine like for pet nat be cold stabilized and heat stabilized?
Yeah, I'm going to just jump in really quick and say I was also interested in this detail from Michael's presentation. You can answer this question about pet nat first, about whether that wine should be cold and or heat or bentonite or protein stabilized. But I'd like you to sort of hit the high points again about the traditional method and not using bentonite on the base wine. Very interested to hear about that.
Okay, so first the thing with the pet nat, and Josie, you're making pet nat too, I think you said. But no, heat and cold stable in a regular pet nat, you don't worry about that because as I talked to a friend of mine who does pet nat up in the Finger Lakes, and I just gave her a quick call and saying, what do you do to protein? Do you protein stabilize your pet nat? And she just, her tongue in cheek, she just answered, dude, it's pet nat. It's cloudy, it's fun, and there's all sorts of things going on in there, and it's always changing. You don't do those things. You don't cold stabilize, and because you would have to cold stabilize at the juice stage, and that's not cold stabilization.
Mhm.
Uh, you could possibly chill down the bottles after this when the second fermentation is complete and do a modified disgorging. But then you start losing all of the advantage of having a pet nat, which is the excitement and the gunk.
Yeah. Andy, Kent, Kristy, do you make pet nat?
Don't, no.
No?
I do not.
Okay. Okay.
After this discussion, do any of you plan to try making a pet nat?
I think it would be fun to do a small batch to, yeah, we're going to experiment with it. I think it would be great.
Yeah, we're full body armor.
Oh, before I forget, I'm going to jump in again right now. I don't know if you see it, but I don't know. I won't hold that up for too long. I got 5 stitches in my thumb 2 weeks ago. I was crown capping, manually crown capping some research wine, and as Michael mentioned, the bottle had some sort of weakness or a scratch on it, and the darn thing, I'm holding it with my left and I'm capping with the right, and it exploded in my left hand, shattered, and drove a huge piece of glass right through the meat of my thumb. And I instantly decided that moving forward, I was going to wear a heavy leather glove on my capping hand, and of course always wear eye protection. And I've seen people are doing a lot of wine bottling right now, and they're happy on social media to show the crew working. And very rarely do I see anybody wearing any eye protection. And even if your bottling line has clear doors to close and such, take it from me, wear your eye protection and hand protection in any type of bottling operations.
Was this a sparkling wine, Drew?
No. I bottle small batches of my research wine in beer bottles.
I'm impressed.
This was a 16-ounce
that you
beer
were able
bottle,
to
and I
explode a bottle of non-sparkling wine.
just for my little research batches, where I maybe have 3 or 4 bottles of a wine, I'll just put it in beer bottles because I don't want to mess with corks.
Yeah. Okay, and to your point about, oh, go ahead, Josie.
Oh, I did want to just mention, I do encourage people to try making pet nat. We opened in, I guess our second harvest was in 2020, and I made like a little tiny bit of pet nat. I did 10 cases just off one of our fermentation tanks that was tasting really nice. And I put it into heavyweight sparkling bottles with a crown cap, and people loved it. So last year we actually did 2 different lots. We did a white and a rosé, and we did about 25 or 30 cases of each of those. And people are just loving them. We sold out of the white, and we're almost out of the rosé now. So
Did you price it less than the sparkling?
no, more actually. It's something new, and depending on where you are, it's something that most people will not have heard of or won't have tried before if you're in more like rural, outside of city areas. So for us, most of our customers, it's kind of like their first pet nat they've ever tried. But ours turned out really nice, and as long as it's a nice clean fermentation and the wine tastes good going into the bottle, obviously you don't want to have any issues with the fermentation. But yeah, we've had a good luck, and we're gonna make even more this year. So
Cool.
That's good.
and it doesn't take a lot of equipment. To do it. So
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents.
So now we have like a few questions about traditional methods. So I will combine them. but 3 questions. So the first one is, would you still pick early the grapes, hybrid grapes, for the traditional method, because they tend to be very acidic if you harvest early? So do you keep that high acid grapes? Do you harvest them early to make the sparkling wine following traditional method? And then what are the pros and the cons of malolactic fermentation of base wine? And another question is, there are so many ways to sweeten sparkling wine, I think. So how do you decide how much dosage to add and what type to use? So I have 3 questions just for the traditional method. Who wants to start answering? Josie, you want to start? Or Andrew, Andy, if you have any?
I'll jump in. For at least for the hybrid grape question, on that end, when I at Cedar Ridge, I always made I had 4 grape varietals that I used to make our sparkling, and it did pretty well. I think we got the Dick Peterson Award 3 years with it, and I picked the Brianna, and I picked that pretty early where I can get that tropical note with heavy pineapple notes to it. And then some lacrosse and lacrescent because I wanted that acidity. I did not go through malolactic fermentation. I kind of wanted that acidity, but only because I really wanted the aromatics. And one of the aromatics that I really thought was like this little sleeper grape that was perfect for sparkling was Elvira, which is a really late season ripener. And I knew I was never going to get it, so I always knew that it had to be super acidic. And I would always pick that. That was my blend. And you know, when you're looking at say Chardonnay from Champagne, you know, it's not 100% vintage very often. It's usually blended from previous years to create this blended Chardonnay. I don't have vintages and vintages of La Crescent. So, you know, we kind of have to use a combination of our hybrids to create the flavor profile that we want. And I always thought that I like to go a little higher on the acid, even knowing, and Mike, you could prove me wrong, but there is a touch higher with carbonic acid after the you know, we get the bubbles in the bottle that you also have to have in your mind as well. So you kind of aim a little bit lower on that acidity balance that you're looking for. But I think it works really well for your aromatics. But like I said, your choice in what hybrids you use is the biggest factor on what flavor profile you're looking for. Do you want it tropical? Do you want it to be more subdued and almost chewy or doughy? You know, the method through the traditional style there, that what type of hybrid grapes you use is going to be not necessarily how early you pick, but what flavor profile and aromatics you want and how you get those aromatics through acidity. So that makes any sense. That's how I typically make our sparkling.
Yeah. Good. Josie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so the answer is it's a balance, I feel like. I mainly use the U of M varieties for our sparkling wines, so the Brix does tend to rise pretty quickly before the acid drops, you know, before you get like lower acids. But I don't worry about super high acids as much as I do about high Brix. I usually do water down the juice a little bit, just because the Brix tends to get a little bit higher than I want it to be at the beginning. So I'm not afraid to add a little bit of water just to dilute the sugar a little bit at the beginning.
What Brix do you like to focus at?
But I generally try to pick between 20 and 21 Brix sometimes the Marquette will get to be, you know, between 21 and 22 pretty quickly, and you know, even the front Gree. But yeah, I try to target that, and I don't worry about the acid quite as much, because there's things you can do in the cellar to reduce the acid later.
Yeah.
But there's not as much as you can do to reduce the bricks, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Andy, do you make, so we don't see you, we can just see your name,
Yeah, I'm
but
holding off on my video because it seems to be slowing down my connection. So sorry.
no, that's fine. So do you have anything to add to that?
Mainly focused on our rosé, our sparkling rosé. We use 100% Frontenac, and we pick that usually around 19 bricks, and I mean the pH coming in is right around 3, so we tend to carry quite a bit of acidity with the sparkling rosé, and I think that helps bring out the more, I guess, tart fruit notes that we want to have in that rosé.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we use in our cuvee, we use Catawba, and that naturally carries quite a bit of acidity too, so that, you know,
Do
helps balance everything out.
do any of you take your wines through I can't ever say it, melodic fermentation if you're going to make it into sparkling?
No, I don't.
Actually, I can answer that
Yeah.
because I do a little bit of my own experimentally out here, and I put mine through malolactic, but that's because it is small batches, and I'm doing it experimentally. I don't have the means of doing a sterile filtration or stabilizing it, so I'm doing it for 2 reasons. I picked the grapes at very low bricks, so my acid's very high. So it's a natural way of bringing the acid down a little bit, but primarily because it gives me microbial stability. But if you're going to do malolactic, I would suggest not doing a sequential inoculation. Do a co-inoculation where you hit it with the bacteria about 24 hours after you hit the primary, you know, after you start the fermentation, about 24 hours after you add the yeast for the primary fermentation. The advantage of doing this is you're going to have much less chance of having a struggling fermentation, like quite often occurs with sequential inoculation. And in the yeast itself consumes diacetyl, that buttery character, and so it maintains the fresh fruit characteristics if you can co-inoculate like that. So I use it, as I say, both as a means of doing a little bit of deacidification and making the wine microbially stable at the same time, but I always do co-inoculation.
So is there any specific YAN requirements or yeast selection for alcoholic fermentation for the traditional method? What specific yeast do you use? Any specific YAN requirements? That's a question we have.
For the first fermentation or for the second fermentation?
I think for the buttock fermentation, so second fermentation.
Yeah, the generally accepted amount is a YAN of about 100 parts per million. And for the second fermentation, I personally always just use a very strong Bionis strain. I'm either using something like EC1118 or DV10, usually a champagne-derived yeast that's used to those conditions.
Okay.
Basically a bulletproof yeast. You're not going to get a lot of character and flavor during the actual fermentation, because it's basically such a short fermentation, the second one.
So you use the encapsulated yeast?
Yeah, the encapsulated yeast is that's another Bionis strain. It's a QA23, also very strong.
That's what we use.
Yeah.
Since you brought it up, Kristy, we had a little bit of a discussion earlier about the pros and cons of encapsulated yeast versus granular yeast. Would any of you, Andrew had some comments on that along that line as well?
We've only used encapsulated yeast, so I don't know what the cons would be. I mean, I don't know the advantages of using another way.
Yeah. Every there is no magic bullet. You have, for second fermentation, you can either do a buildup culture with loose yeast, or you can do encapsulated yeast. If you use encapsulated yeast, you have to be much more careful about the parameters for your base wine, because the encapsulated yeast is more delicate. It's in a more delicate state. You have a lot more wiggle room with loose yeast because you're building up a really large population that's very strong, and it's not sequestered inside these beads. So I've with loose yeast, I've fermented higher alcohol wines. I've fermented. I've done second fermentations with all sorts of base wines. You're much more limited by the parameters that the producers give you for the beads. So it saves you because you don't have to do riddling, and you don't have to do a build-up culture. But you have to be more careful in your production of your base wine.
And
Personally,
sorry.
what?
No, go ahead. I have a question for you after.
Oh, I was just going to say, personally, when I'm doing my own, I actually like doing the build-up culture. I like seeing how vigorous it gets. So I do a build-up culture on mine, and then I curse myself afterwards when I have to do the riddling. But I do not mind doing a build-up culture, and I always feel good when I see that very vigorous culture when you're working on, and I know that there's like 70 million cells per mil, and I feel happy.
Going back just to finish off the malolactic fermentation discussion.
Yeah.
Last year we did take our wines through that, and 2 years before we did not. And I feel like that our sparklings were better, more crisp without it. It could have just been our process, but going forward we won't. And I will discuss it, but we'll see. I mean, I thought we're selling them out. Nobody's complaining, but I personally enjoy them more without it.
Yeah, no, if I were doing it, if I had a full-scale winery here and I were doing this commercially, especially where I am, where acid is at a premium, I would probably not do a malolactic, because I also would have the means of doing a sterile filtration, which I don't have here. You don't want your wine to undergo malolactic in the bottle. I've never seen it happen with traditional method, but I have seen it happen with the Charmat method, where they did not do a sterile filtration and the wine underwent a malolactic in the bottle. Personally, I'm jealous of you guys out there, because I'm an acid freak. I like champagne base wine. And basically give me a dozen oysters and a bottle of champagne base wine, and I'm happy. But not many people share my love of that acid. The Frontenac that Andy uses.
Or oyster.
Oh, yeah. The Frontenac that Andy uses is like, I love the Frontenac based rosé bubblies, and I remember tasting the very first one that you guys made at Breezy Hills. God, that was nice.
It was fun. We got a little more color out of it this year, so it's going to be a little darker than a rosé, but it'll still have that acid to it.
Oh yeah, and quite often with something like that, your pH is so low that it quite often protects you against undergoing malolactic in the bottle anyway.
Yep.
Oh, and speaking of malolactic, I was just going to tell Kristy, you don't need to say malolactic, just say secondary fermentation.
Well, then I always think of secondary fermentation as when
Oh,
we put the
second bottle.
encapsulation in the
Okay,
bottle.
yeah, great.
So
No,
yeah, I will always struggle with that word.
all right.
MF. I can say
MLF.
MF.
MLF. That's it.
ML, yes, just say
ML.
ML.
Yeah, that's what.
I've seen a few more questions here. I'm going to go ahead and jump in, Ode, and ask one of them. There's a question about using screw caps for sparkling wine. I don't think for traditional method, but are there screw caps, Michael, that can tolerate 6 atmospheres or above?
Yeah, well, I don't know about 6 atmospheres. I remember a few years ago, I think it might have been Stelvin. I think they came out with a cap for sparkling wine, but I don't know what pressure it will take. Do you know, Josie?
Yeah, I recall they do have something, but I think it's probably only about 2 volumes or something. Like it's not high, but I can't remember either.
So
And there's also, I think Zork has a sparkling wine stopper too. But a lot of these are also are short-lived. They're not meant for any kind of long aging.
And a follow-up question really quick. Michael, you mentioned in your talk about a specialized crown cap for either for sparkling wines or maybe it was just for tirage. What makes the crown cap special?
Well, as opposed to a beer cap, I know we represented a crown caps company for a couple of years, and they had crown caps specifically for sparkling wine. Now, the different as opposed to beer, for instance, sparkling wine has lower pH, higher alcohol, and a lot more pressure than beer, and a lot more pressure than beer or soda pop. So it has to be strong enough to hold that pressure in. And insofar as the chemical makeup of the crown cap, I'm not sure, but it would strike me that it would behoove them to have metal being used that is more resistant to the high acid. And I know there have been issues with some crown caps, especially made from standard steel, with rusting when like a bottle above them was leaking and the wine came down on the crown cap below them and caused that crown cap to rust. So,
what is the maximum atmosphere of most sparkling wines? Do we know?
Jim, I would say
6.
after disgorging, you're probably down around 5 atmospheres of pressure. That's under standard conditions. They usually goes from about, I guess, 9.5 to 11 grams per liter of CO2.
Okay. Good. I do have a question about the foam because you mentioned the foam. That's really a quality of sparkling wines, right? And it's coming both from grapes and from the yeast. So do you use specific yeast? And that's a question for all of you. Do you use a specific yeast to have enough foam? Or do you use, did you observe that depending on the grape variety that is used, the hybrid varieties tend to have a little bit more proteins than Vitis vinifera varieties? So did you observe in the past a difference of foam based on the varieties that was used? Does my question make sense? So 2 questions about the yeast and the variety.
Okay, well, as far as the yeast are concerned, no, I don't, you're looking for a yeast where the second fermentation is just going to be bulletproof and carry out the second fermentation. And it's the autolysis, the breakdown of that is going to give you the proteins. And so I I don't know that anybody's done any study as to which yeast in breaking down puts the most protein into the wine.
Mhm.
But I know some aspects of it. For instance, in the aging, it's generally said that you want at least 9 months aging on the yeast, and that will help with with the removal of the yeast, because it's much harder to riddle before that. Uh, if you have it aging less time on the yeast. So far as the protein level, well, basically protein works with the CO2. They tend to cling to each other. Actually, Andy, I think, yeah, you were there, the seminar where Belinda Kemp and I spoke at the Iowa show. This goes about 8 years ago now. And she
I
showed.
can barely remember last year, let alone 8 years ago.
Oh, God. So young and so few brain cells.
Right. It's all that sparkling wine.
Well, yeah, you better make it worthwhile. But she was saying it's almost like a micelle, which is basically it's how like, for instance, it works when you are with detergent. You have this bubble, and it has a charge on it, and it attracts the positive charges of the protein around it, and so the protein tends to stabilize the bubbles, and the bubbles stabilize the protein.
Mhm.
And
So just to be clear, we're talking about for making a base wine for traditional method does not need to be bentonite stabilized.
Right.
yeah,
Mhm.
now the thing is, there are some hybrids, and especially the ones out of University of Minnesota, tend to be higher in protein. I was talking to Mark Wenzel down at Illinois Sparkling Company about this, and he's using only hybrids. And he said certain ones, like the ones out of Minnesota, tend to be the highest in protein. And I think he intimated that he does a minor uh, 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 protein or bentonite treatment with them. Some of them, like some of the more traditional ones, like Marshall Foch, tend to be much lower. So a lot of it it changes depending on what variety, it changes on where it's grown.
Mhm.
Like, for instance, if you look at the Champagne varieties, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, Chardonnay, uh, hardly anybody and nobody that I've talked to in Champagne protein stabilizes. The same producers that are over there are not doing any protein stabilization. Some of them have operations here in California. They've planted the same varieties, and they have to do a modified protein stabilization because the grapes get a little riper, they're a little higher in protein. The change in climate, the change in soil, all of these things affects the protein level.
Yeah.
And I
So
do
that's
still,
when I ask, like, did you observe any differences in terms of foam depending on the varieties that were used? Kristy, did you observe anything?
I did not observe differences on the foam.
Okay.
But I'm curious the amount of the resting the wines for 9 months on the second fermentation
Yeah.
in the bottle. We don't do that for all of us. It's when we get, because we're small and we do everything by hand. It's
Right.
like when we get to it. I'm curious if other people wait 9 months, because we don't wait that long before we start using it.
I'd say, well, it depends. I mean, if you're talking about the big guys like the Domaine Chandons, the Mums, yeah, they'll quite often be like for their regular brutes, age it usually anywhere from 12 to 24 months. Then you have their special cuvées that they might age longer. I remember Domaine Chandon would age their top of the line for 6 years. Gloria Ferrer would age it for 10 years, 9 or 10 years. On the other hand, you have some other producers that they want to maintain more fruit, and they're also looking at the bottom line, and they're aging for maybe 5 or 6 months.
Yeah.
And they have had, in some cases, they have had, the primary thing is the issue with the ease of riddling and disgorging. So they've dealt, and they deal with that by changing their riddling program on their machines, or by adding maybe more of the adjuvant that helps the yeast glom together. In your case, well, if you're using the beads, you don't have to worry about that
Yeah.
if you're not riddling it.
Yeah, I mean, ours tends to usually spends the summer on the yeast, and we disgorge it and bottle it, or finish it the following winter, when we've got some nice cold weather outside. But
Matters
not
how thirsty we
necessarily,
are. We might have to do it after 3 months.
yeah, it's not necessarily by design, more so just when we get to it and when we have time, and we can't do it in the summertime. So
Yeah, the logistics is important. Style, what style of wine you're trying to make is important.
and we do like to have that little bit of aging time versus trying to push it out real quick. So usually letting it set over the summer is our best option versus rushing it and trying to get it finished right away in that same bottling season.
And I remember at the seminar we did where Belinda was there, we tasted afterwards. I believe we tasted your Frontenac, and we tasted Mark Wenzel's Frontenac, and his tended to be brighter, fresher, more fruit driven, and yours had a lot more of that almost traditional complexity to it.
Yep.
Right. Thank you. I have a question about steroid filter. Can you explain how best to steroid filter into a counter pressure filler? We find that the cartridge agitates the bubbles too much during filling, causing excessive foam. That's a question from Anne. Think.
Oh, for that, I would probably actually have you get in touch with our filtration guru. Her name is Maria Peterson, and she pretty much answers a lot of the actually hands-on direct questions about these things. She can be reached at mariap@scottlab.com. But generally, a lot of the aspects of gushing that I've seen in some Charmat places has to do with not only pressure differential, but temperature differential. If you have to make sure, oh, well, it helps if all of if the room, the equipment, the filler, all of that are all chilled down so that when the wine hits it, it won't cause a temperature spike in the wine and cause the release of pressure. Or at higher temperatures, you'll lose solubility of your CO2. And we saw this one place where they were doing canned effervescent wine, and they were losing a lot, but turned out they didn't have a place to store the cans in the winery. And so they were outside in the sun, bringing the cans in. And so the wine was hitting it, and it was gushing like crazy. But other than that, some of the other, if it continues gushing, then I would talk to Maria about the filtration side of it.
Good. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
So I just sent the link to the previous recording. It's not related directly, but anyway. We have other questions about pet nat. So we are going back to pet nat. At what sugar level do you put pet nat in the bottle? And what pressure do you shoot for in pet nats? So 2 questions for pet nats.
Take it, Josie.
Yeah, Josie.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I was told, and it has worked for me, is to bottle when the wine is under 1 Brix on the hydrometer. So as long as it's under 1, you should be okay. That should be like enough, enough sugar has been consumed in the fermentation so that the rest of the fermentation in the bottle doesn't get too high. And of course it depends on the starting Brix of the wine and everything, but anyway, I under 1 Brix is a pretty good. I guess I've heard that from a few different sources, so I think that's kind of a standard metric for pet nat.
Josie, are you, just to be totally clear with these newer winemakers, are you using your +5, -5 hydrometer?
Yes.
So for anybody out there who does not own a +5, -5 Brix hydrometer, go to piwine.com and get yourself one.
And make sure you're like paying attention to the temperature of your wine too, and doing temperature correction when you're reading your hydrometer, because that can make a huge difference if your wine is warm or cold. And so what I do is, I obviously have the wine in a tank that has temperature control. So as it approaches that 1 Brix level, I chill it down. I chill start to chill the wine down to about 35 degrees, 35, 40 degrees for a couple days to kind of slowly stop that, or at least slow down the fermentation before bottling. And then that helps a little bit to drop some of that sediment out too. But that's really just to like slow down the fermentation enough so that you don't blow past the point that you're aiming for either. So
Yeah. Kristy, do you do the same thing for pet nat?
We don't do pet net, we do a piquette.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I thought, yeah.
We do a piquette, which we didn't talk about today, is
True.
one more style, but we don't do the pet net.
Okay. All
We
right.
could talk about piquette if we have time after answering all those questions.
I think we are almost done with the questions. Let me check.
There was somebody who was asking about sugar dosing with sugar. There are some questions on that.
Okay.
oh, what type of sugar maybe?
At what sugar levels do you put in the bottles? There's a couple of them like that. How do you know? Let's see.
Yeah.
How do you decide how much dosage to add and what type do you use? Josie, maybe, or any one of you.
So we do a brut, and we just tap off the bottles. We do not, we don't sugar up anything at Walker Homestead.
And Josie, how do you decide how much dosage to do? I assume this is for traditional method, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure, Matt. I just do, just I do it by taste mostly. I have a range that I'm shooting for, and of course in Champagne, there's traditional like brut, extra brut,
Extra dry.
extra dry. All of those have like certain sugar levels that you're finishing the wine with. So if you kind of start there, I just literally start at the beginning of disgorgement when I'm disgorging a new lot, and just doing a few bottles and seeing what I like, and then going from there. Same with Charmat. If in the tank, I pull a sample and I do a couple of mixtures and figure out what sugar level I like.
And once you
Does that
figure
answer?
that out, once you figure that out, you then measure your bottling tank. And let's say you've decided, hey, I'm going to do 7 grams of sugar per liter,
Yep.
and now I've got this volume, and it's 716 liters. Okay, well, you do the math, and you add that much. Do you use dry sucrose, dry sugar?
Yep, I just use regular sugar from the grocery store mostly. And I mix it either with wine. I've also done water, just a water sugar sulfur mix, or wine sugar sulfur. But yeah.
Cool.
Has anyone ever used glycerin in a part of their dosage to either find balance, maybe not add cane sugar or any source along those lines? But has anyone ever tried using glycerin?
You mean glycerol?
Glycerol. Yeah, sorry. Yes, glycerol.
I've heard of it being done, but I haven't personally tried it.
I only know of one person using glycerin or glycerol around here, and it's Andy Haraski, and he uses it just in his still wine. I'm kind of in the same boat as Josie. We do a water and sugar, like a simple syrup dosage to add at the end, and kind of the same way, like a tasting trial at the beginning of our lot. Do a couple sample bottles, or however we want to do it, to see where we want to sweeten it within the parameters of the label. I think we're demi-sec on our cuvee, so we've got a little bit higher sugar range that we can work with to sweeten it a little more.
Sure. I just wasn't sure if glycerol would affect, if you're just trying to knock off the edge, if maybe we just went a little too far on the acid, and instead of adding sugar, if anybody's ever used that glycerol, just to, if it affected bubbles or if it affected any other type of methods. But
I think you would also have to look at the legalities, because the government is very strict about what things you can add. And I don't know if you can legally add glycerol.
okay.
Yeah, that was one of the questions we had. Is it even allowed by the TTB as an additive?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because and sometimes they will allow you to add things, but then you have to put it on your label that as with the description of what you've added, because you're now a non-standard wine.
Yeah.
Is anyone here making piquette?
Let's move on, Piquet.
Not yet.
You know what, Kristy, let me just ask one more question of Mike. We've got one more written question from Mark Wedge at Dancing Dragonfly. He says he's heard of a U.S. traditional style champagne maker using cork at tirage instead of a crown cap. Have you heard of this? Do you know who he's talking about?
Oh God, I don't know who is doing that in the U.S. I know several producers that I wouldn't be surprised if they did it, but it's supposedly this is what like Bollinger does in France with their RD. They age it on cork rather than on crown caps.
Good enough. All right, and now Kristy, go ahead. Give us a minute on Piquet.
I'm going to real quick put a link in. Now I got to find you guys. I lost you.
Sorry, I'm just sharing the screen just because we are close to the end time. Just to let you know that next time would be October 18. And we will talk about micro-oxygenation and oxidation management. And stay with us. We are going to talk about Piquet now.
So is anybody out there making piquette? Which is the byproducts of the winemaking, and you
Pomace.
yeah, and you get like a lower alcohol fuzzy wine in a bottle, and we just cap it like a beer cap.
So you're talking about taking what comes out of the press of white grapes,
Right.
let's say,
Yeah, and adding some sugar
and some water,
and water,
some yeast.
And it ferments in the bottle, and you get so it has some of the characteristics that you spoke of the pet net. And at first I thought that when I first saw it, I thought, oh, I thought it was spelled Paquette, but then I see that they're two different things.
Yeah, it works really well. It's a little bit lighter in flavor profile. Obviously, it's not using the actual juice, but it is a little bit of residual. If you're doing red grapes like a Marquette or Frontenac, you can make a really nice light rosé style with that Piquette. It's just another way of being sustainable, using up and making a secondary product. And then it's also another great way to, by doing that same type of fermentation, if you have a distillation process, you can make grappa. It's great for cocktails, mixers, on its own. It's definitely a great way to, stretch your grapes and your product, your harvest out a little bit further and be able to recoup some more profitability. It's a great option.
And the people love the story, just like the pet, it's something different, and trying that style and hearing the story behind it. We need to check with the TTB on what our options are for. Right now, we're making it and giving it away as part of some of our farm to table dinners. But we are going to explore how we label it, bottle it, and sell it.
I seem to remember, Ode, maybe I seem to remember once reading that there was a law in France against paying the vineyard workers with piquette.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when I worked in Burgundy, what we called it, we didn't call it piquette, we called it la boîte, which means the wheelbarrow. And that was what you paid. That's what you gave the vineyard workers. And oh God, I still remember making the rounds of the workers that lived in the village with my winemaker, and every one of them would bring out this very acidic, very green wine that was low in alcohol. And by the end of the day, our stomachs were churning. And
Yeah.
Acid.
Yeah.
All
But
right.
if you are interested in making piquettes, I would be very interested too to be in contact with you, because I'm looking at a way to add a value to the waste, the common waste of winemaking. So, and I'm gonna work still with you, Kristy and Kent, hopefully on this year on the piquette.
Yes, good. We're going to look to actually be bottling it and selling it. We've had really good feedback from it, so.
And I would think actually that the hybrids would work better than vinifera, because the hybrids are much more aromatic. And so even with watering down, you're going to get a lot of components in there that are lost in the vinifera.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Agreed.
of course you have plenty of acid. So even though you're going to be diluting the acid, it's still going to be there, so that you're going to have that liveliness.
And you can drink it for lunch and stay productive in the afternoon. That's how we'll sell it.
You're talking to a group here that can drink anything for lunch.
I know, we're so well exercised, but not everybody can do it as well as we.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
And maybe I missed it. Are you using fresh pressed grapes or already fermented grapes?
The fresh pressed grapes.
Okay.
So grapes used for either rosé or white wine making.
Yeah. And I've done both.
Okay.
We did all, yeah, we did our Petite Pearl. So we did all of them, yeah.
Yeah, because
Do
I think
you
that
have
ones that we have in stock
preference,
is
or-
Frontenac Gris and Petite Pearl. I think we have two different pet nets.
Right.
And I actually prefer the Frontenac Gris pet net over Frontenac Gris wine. It's actually fantastic.
So the Petite Pearl was after alcoholic fermentation. And MLF, maybe, if you did do MLF.
Yeah, it would have been. Yep.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Right.
thank
Good.
you all for a wonderful discussion. Michael, thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you for the invitation.
Ode has put up the slide here, and it has both her email and my email. The winemakers, you just need to hunt them down at their wineries. Michael Jones, of course, works for Scott Labs, and I noticed you don't mind people knowing your email and your phone number, Michael. You're easy to get a hold of.
I get lonely here otherwise.
Well, wonderful. Thank you again, all of you, for your participation. I think we're getting into the late part of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you everybody for your participation. It was great to have that great discussion about all types of sparkling wine. So as I mentioned, we will see all of you October 18 or sooner, but otherwise have a good harvest time, a good season, and feel free to take the survey. That's free. It's just gonna take 5 minutes. You're gonna receive an email. So, and I think that's it. Thanks for being with us, and have a good season.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Happy harvest, everyone.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Happy winemaking.
Thanks.